The paint spill. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the busy downtown intersection as Mira clutched her oversized canvas bag closer to her chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from the brisk walk but from the weight of what lay ahead. Today's presentation could determine whether she'd graduate from the art therapy program that had consumed the last 3 years of her life. She checked her phone again. 8:45. The presentation started at 9, and she still had 6 blocks to go. Professor Martinez had been clear. Late arrivals would forfeit their chance to present, and without presenting there would be no graduation. Mira quickened her pace, weaving through the morning crowd of office workers and coffee-clutching commuters. Her bag, heavy with paint tubes, brushes, and her carefully mounted artwork, bounced against her hip with each hurried step. She'd spent weeks preparing pieces that demonstrated how art could heal trauma, how colors could speak when words failed, how a simple brushstroke could unlock emotions buried deep within the human soul. Lost in her anxious thoughts, she didn't see the cyclist until it was too late. The impact wasn't violent, just a glancing blow as the rider swerved to avoid a pothole, but it was enough to send Mira stumbling. Her bag flew from her shoulder, spilling its contents across the busy sidewalk in a spectacular explosion of color. Paint tubes rolled into the street, brushes scattered like fallen pickup sticks, and her mounted artwork slid across the concrete. No, 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 Mira dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather her supplies as pedestrians stepped around her with barely concealed irritation. A tube of crimson paint had burst open, creating an abstract masterpiece on the gray pavement. Her eyes filled with tears as she watched a businessman's expensive shoe step directly through her spilled ultramarine blue. "Here, let me help you." The voice was calm, reassuring. Mira looked up through her blur of panic to see a man in a charcoal suit crouching beside her, already collecting her scattered brushes. His dark eyes held genuine concern, and there was something about his gentle manner that made her racing heart slow just slightly. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful," she stammered, reaching for a paint tube that had rolled near his polished shoes. "Accidents happen," he said simply, carefully examining one of her mounted pieces before handing it to her. "This is beautiful work. The way you've layered the colors here. It's like watching emotions unfold on canvas." Mira paused in her frantic gathering, surprised by his observation. Most people saw her therapeutic art as simple crafts, not understanding the complex psychological theories woven into every brushstroke. But this stranger, this man who should have been rushing to his own important morning appointment, was studying her work with the eye of someone who truly understood art's power. Together, they managed to collect most of her supplies. He even helped her clean the paint stains from her hands with a packet of wet wipes from his briefcase, his touch gentle and professional as he wiped away the blue and red streaks. "You're going to be late," Mira realized suddenly, noticing how he kept glancing at his watch. He smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from serious to warm. "Some things are more important than punctuality. Besides," he gestured to the colorful stains now decorating both their hands, "this is probably the most interesting thing that's happened to me in weeks." As Mira stood, her bag finally reorganized, she realized she didn't even know his name. But before she could ask, he was already stepping back into the flow of pedestrians. "Good luck with whatever brought you out so early with all this beautiful art," he called over his shoulder. And then he was gone, disappeared into the crowd, leaving Mira standing on the sidewalk with paint-stained hands and a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her presentation anxiety. She made it to class with 3 minutes to spare. The gallery encounter. 3 weeks had passed since the paint spill incident, but Mira still found herself thinking about the kind stranger who had helped her. She'd aced her presentation that day, and her professor had specifically praised the emotional depth in her work. Sometimes she wondered if that brief encounter had somehow infused her art with an extra layer of meaning. Tonight, she stood in the sleek Riverside Gallery, watching people admire the therapeutic art exhibition her program had organized. The space buzzed with conversation as visitors moved between the displays, each piece telling a story of healing and hope. Mira smoothed down her simple black dress, still feeling slightly out of place among the wine-sipping art enthusiasts and collectors. "The spatial flow in here is incredible," she overheard a woman saying to her companion. "Whoever designed this renovation really understood how architecture can enhance the emotional impact of art." Mira nodded unconsciously, having noticed the same thing. The gallery's layout seemed to guide visitors through an emotional journey, with intimate alcoves for reflection and open spaces that invited contemplation. The lighting was perfect too, warm and inviting rather than the harsh fluorescence she'd expected. She was admiring a piece by her classmate when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Remember those paint-stained hands?" Mira spun around, her heart skipping as she recognized the warm smile and dark eyes from that morning 3 weeks ago. He looked different in his navy blazer and jeans, more relaxed than the suited professional who had helped her on the street. "You," she breathed, then immediately felt foolish. "I mean, hi. I never got to properly thank you for helping me that day." "Vikram," he said, extending his hand. "And you're welcome. Did everything go well with your presentation?" "Mira," she replied, shaking his hand and noting how his touch was just as gentle as she remembered. "And yes, actually, it went perfectly. I graduated last week. Congratulations." His smile widened genuinely. "So this exhibition features work from our program, art therapy pieces created by students and clients." Mira gestured around the gallery. "It's our way of showing how art can heal, how creativity can help people process trauma and find hope again." Vikram nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the emotional resonance. I've been walking through here for an hour and every piece seems to speak directly to something inside me." He paused, looking almost surprised by his own admission. "I don't usually. That is, I haven't felt moved by art in a long time. What brings you here tonight?" Mira asked, curious about this coincidence that felt too perfect to be random. "I designed the renovation," Vikram said with a modest shrug. "The gallery owners wanted to create a space that would complement therapeutic art, so I researched how architecture affects emotional well-being. It was the most interesting project I've worked on in years." Mira's eyes widened. "You're the architect everyone's been praising?" "The spatial flow, the lighting design, it's all brilliant. You've created an environment where healing happens just by walking through it." A shadow crossed Vikram's face. "I used to believe architecture could do that. Lately, though, my work has been more about meeting building codes and client budgets than creating meaningful spaces." They spent the next hour walking through the gallery together, Mira explaining the therapeutic techniques behind each piece while Vikram shared his design philosophy. She learned that he had studied at the prestigious Delhi School of Architecture, but had gradually shifted toward commercial projects that paid well but left him feeling empty. "Architecture and art therapy aren't that different," Mira observed as they paused before a vibrant painting depicting a storm clearing into sunshine. "We both use our mediums to help people process emotions, to create spaces, physical or psychological, where healing can happen." "I never thought of it that way," Vikram admitted. "I've been so focused on the technical aspects that I forgot about the human element. Buildings aren't just structures. They're environments where people live, work, love, grieve." As the evening wound down and guests began filtering out, neither wanted to end their conversation. They found themselves sitting on a bench outside the gallery, talking as if they were old friends reuniting after a long separation. "This feels surreal," Mira said, pulling her cardigan tighter against the cool evening air. "Running into you again like this. Maybe it's not coincidence," Vikram said softly. "Maybe it's the universe telling us we're supposed to know each other." Under the soft glow of the street lamps, with the gallery's warm light spilling out behind them, Mira felt that same flutter in her chest from 3 weeks ago, only stronger this time, like a painting coming into focus with each careful brushstroke. The unexpected collaboration. 1 month later, Mira balanced a box of art supplies against her hip as she pushed through the heavy doors of the Sunrise Community Center. The morning air still held yesterday's rain, and puddles dotted the cracked parking lot. She'd volunteered to organize art therapy workshops for the elderly residents, a project close to her heart since her grandmother had found such joy in painting during her final years. The center's director, Mrs. Kapoor, greeted her with a weary smile. "I'm so glad you're here, Beta. The residents have been asking about the art sessions all week, but I'm afraid we have a small problem." Mira set down her supplies, noting the way Mrs. Kapoor's eyes darted nervously toward the ceiling. "What kind of problem?" "Structural issues. Nothing immediately dangerous, but the inspector says we need to address some concerns before we can hold group activities. We've hired an architect to assess the situation, actually. He should be here any moment." As if summoned by her words, the front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool air and a familiar figure carrying a leather satchel and measuring tools. Mira's breath caught as Vikram stepped into the lobby, his eyes scanning the space with professional assessment before landing on her with unmistakable surprise. "Mira?" He stopped mid-stride, his serious expression melting into that warm smile she'd been thinking about far too often lately. "You're the architect?" she asked, though the answer was obvious from his equipment. Mrs. Kapoor looked between them with curious eyes. "You two know each other?" "We've met," Vikram said diplomatically, though his gaze lingered on Mira's face. "What are the odds?" "In this city?" "Higher than you'd think," Mira replied, surprising herself with her boldness, especially when the universe seems determined to keep throwing us together. Over the next several hours they worked in an easy partnership that felt entirely natural. Vikram methodically examined support beams and foundation points, while Mira observed how the residents used the space, noting which areas felt welcoming and which seemed to isolate people. When he expressed concern about the weight capacity in the main activity room, she suggested using the smaller side rooms for intimate art sessions instead. "The lighting is actually better in here anyway," she said, standing in one of the alcoves where afternoon sun streamed through tall windows. "And elderly participants often feel more comfortable in smaller groups. Less overwhelming." Vikram paused his measurements to watch her move through the space, noting how she seemed to instinctively understand the room's emotional geography. "You see things differently than I do," he observed. "I'm looking at load-bearing capacity and structural integrity, but you're seeing how the space makes people feel." "Both perspectives matter," Mira said, running her fingers along a windowsill where someone had carved initials years ago. "A building needs to be safe, but it also needs to nurture the people inside it. Your gallery renovation proved you understand that." "That project felt different," Vikram admitted, kneeling to examine a crack in the floor. "Working with you now, I'm remembering why I became an architect in the first place. It wasn't just about building things. It was about creating spaces where life could happen." As they worked, Mira found herself studying Vikram's focused concentration, the careful way he documented every measurement, the gentle manner in which he reassured Mrs. Kapoor about the minor repairs needed. There was something deeply attractive about watching someone excel at their craft, especially when that craft served others. By evening, they had developed a comprehensive plan. Vikram would oversee the necessary structural improvements, while Mira redesigned the art therapy program to work within the building's limitations and strengths. What could have been a setback had become an opportunity for creative problem-solving. "Dinner?" Vikram asked as they packed up their respective tools. "I know a place that serves excellent South Indian food, and I feel like we should celebrate this collaboration." "I'd like that," Mira said, then felt compelled to add, "This doesn't feel like coincidence anymore, does it?" "No," Vikram replied quietly, holding the door open for her. "It feels like something much more intentional, like we're being brought together for a reason." Walking out into the evening air, their shadows merging on the wet pavement, Mira wondered what that reason might be. But as Vikram's hand brushed against hers while reaching for his car keys, she thought she was beginning to understand. The walls come down. 2 months into their collaboration, Mira found herself spending more evenings at Vikram's apartment than her own cramped studio. His place reflected his profession: clean lines, thoughtful lighting, and an open floor plan that somehow managed to feel both spacious and intimate. Tonight, blueprints for the community center covered his dining table, while takeout containers sat cooling beside technical drawings. "The load calculations don't add up," Vikram muttered, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I've checked them 3 times, but something feels wrong." Mira looked up from where she was sketching layouts for the art stations. Over the past weeks, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of Vikram's stress, the way his shoulders tensed, how his usual calm confidence gave way to meticulous double-checking of every detail. "When's the last time you trusted your instincts without triple-checking the numbers?" she asked gently. "I can't afford to trust instincts," Vikram replied sharply, then immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. It's just, when it comes to structural integrity, there's no room for error." Mira set down her pencil and moved to stand behind his chair, noting the rigid tension in his neck and shoulders. "Vikram, what happened?" "I've watched you work, and you're brilliant at what you do. But you carry this weight like you're terrified of making a mistake." For a long moment, Vikram stared at the blueprints without seeing them. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My father was an architect too. When I was 15, he designed a shopping complex in Gurgaon. He was so proud of that project. Innovative design, cost-effective materials ahead of schedule. Vikram's hands clenched into fists. During the monsoon season, part of the structure collapsed. 3 people died, including a little girl who was just buying school supplies with her mother. Mira's breath caught, but she remained silent, sensing there was more. The investigation found that my father had cut corners on materials to stay within budget. The client had pressured him, threatened to find another architect, and he chose his career over safety. Vikram turned in his chair to face her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He couldn't live with what he'd done. 6 months later, he had a heart attack. The doctors said it was stress-related. "Oh, Vikram," Mira whispered, her heart breaking for the teenager who had lost his father and his faith in the profession he'd inherited. "Every building I design, every calculation I make, I see that little girl's face. I see my father's guilt. That's why I can't trust instincts. Why I've stopped taking creative risks. I'd rather build boring, over-engineered structures than risk someone getting hurt because I wanted to be innovative." Mira knelt beside his chair, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Your father's tragedy doesn't have to define your entire career. You're not him, and you've already proven that you can create beautiful, safe spaces. The gallery renovation, this community center project, you're honoring his memory by doing better. But what if I'm not enough?" Vikram asked, vulnerability cracking his voice. "What if I make the same mistakes? Then you'll learn from them the way I learned from mine." Mira's thumb traced gentle circles on his palm. "I used to have panic attacks so severe that I couldn't leave my apartment for weeks at a time. Art therapy saved me, taught me that healing happens when we face our fears, not when we hide from them." Vikram looked at her with new understanding. "Is that why you're so passionate about using art to help others heal?" "Because I know what it's like to feel broken," Mira confirmed. "And I know that broken doesn't mean unfixable. It just means you need time, patience, and someone who believes you're worth healing." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of shared vulnerability settling between them like a bridge finally completed. When Vikram looked back at his blueprints, something had shifted in his posture. "The calculations are fine," he said quietly. "I was overthinking because I was afraid, not because anything was actually wrong." "Fear makes terrible blueprints," Mira said softly. "But love builds things that last forever." Vikram turned to study her face in the warm lamplight, seeing not just the talented artist he'd been collaborating with, but the brave, wounded, healing woman who had somehow become essential to his world. "Mira," he whispered, and she heard everything he couldn't yet say in the way her name fell from his lips like a prayer. The masterpiece. Together, 1 year later, golden afternoon light streamed through the renovated windows of the Sunrise Community Center as families gathered for the grand reopening celebration. Children's laughter echoed through corridors that had been transformed from institutional gray to warm, welcoming spaces filled with natural light and carefully placed art installations. Mira stood in the main therapy room, watching Mrs. Patel guide her granddaughter's small hands as they painted together at one of the specially designed low tables. The sight filled her with the same joy she'd felt every day for the past 6 months, watching the space come alive exactly as she and Vikram had envisioned. "The sensory garden is a huge hit," Vikram said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of chai from the celebration refreshments. 3 families have already asked if we can design similar spaces for their homes." Mira accepted the warm cup gratefully, noting how relaxed Vikram looked in his casual shirt and jeans, so different from the tense, overcautious architect she'd first encountered. "Mrs. Kapoor says the waiting list for art therapy sessions is 3 months long. We might need to expand into the adjacent building." Already drawing up preliminary sketches, Vikram grinned, and Mira's heart fluttered at the creative enthusiasm that had gradually returned to his voice. Over the past year, they had worked so seamlessly together on this project that the center felt like more than the sum of their individual contributions. Vikram's innovative structural design created flexible spaces that could transform based on need, while Mira's therapeutic installations were integrated into the very architecture. Calming blue walls in the quiet reflection areas, energizing yellows in the activity spaces, and a rainbow corridor that guided visitors through an emotional journey from arrival to departure. "Do you remember what you said that first night at the gallery?" Mira asked, watching a teenager carefully add details to a canvas while his grandmother offered gentle encouragement. "About buildings being environments where people live, work, love, and grieve?" Vikram nodded, his eyes following her gaze to the intergenerational art session. "Turns out they're also places where people heal, discover, and fall in love." The words hung between them with gentle weight. Over the past year, their professional partnership had deepened into something neither had dared to hope for after their previous heartbreaks. Love had grown quietly between them, built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the gradual healing of old wounds. "Mira," Vikram said softly, setting down his chai cup and reaching into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." But instead of a ring, he pulled out a rolled set of papers tied with a ribbon the color of her favorite ultramarine blue paint. Mira's breath caught as she carefully unrolled what were clearly architectural blueprints, but unlike any she'd ever seen. The design showed a beautiful home with an open concept living space, large windows for natural light, and at its heart, a spacious art studio with northern exposure, built-in storage for supplies, and a small adjacent room labeled therapy space for clients. "It's our future," Vikram said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "If you want it. A home designed around your calling with space for both healing and creating, a place where we can build a life together." Tears blurred Mira's vision as she studied every thoughtful detail. The reading nook where she could plan sessions, the garden designed for outdoor art therapy, the kitchen island perfect for working side by side on evening projects. "That day when you spilled your paints," she whispered, "I never imagined that accident would lead to this." "It wasn't an accident," Vikram said, gently taking her paint-stained hands in his. "It was fate painting us into each other's lives. Every unexpected meeting, every collaboration, every moment we've helped each other heal, it was all leading to this moment." Around them, the community center buzzed with joy and connection, the embodiment of what they could create together. But as Mira looked into Vikram's eyes and saw their entire future reflected there, she realized the center was just their first masterpiece. Their real work of art would be the life they built together, one careful, loving brushstroke at a time. "Yes," she whispered, and sealed their promise with a kiss that tasted like chai and felt like coming home. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows they had chosen together, painting the walls with the same golden light that had witnessed their first meeting, when a scattered handful of paint tubes had somehow scattered two hearts directly toward each other.